In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about bidirectionality in the family system. The question I want us to consider is, does it go both ways? Historically, research has assumed a unidirectional, so parent-to-child, model for examining influences on children's development as it emerges from parent-child relations, with children viewed as passive recipients of socialization that is initiated and enacted by the parents. However, we now know that the parent-child relationship is much more complex than that. So, for example, research has found that children can change their parents' emotions, and in fact are very intentional about doing so. So a teen might initiate an argument with a sibling to evoke a particular response from a parent. Now let's think about diverse families and bidirectionality. Research has found that when there is bidirectionality in immigrant families, the family is better able to thrive. You have a teen in an American school surrounded by U.S. values, customs, mannerisms, media, dress, and language, and they bring that back into the family system. If the family can adapt to what the teen is bringing into the family, and the teen is able to stay connected to the culture supported in the home, the family system will be able to remain more stable. In your experience, how do parents view bidirectionality in the family system? In what ways would they say their children influence them? Have you incorporated this perspective into your work? So the answer to the question, does it go both ways, is that yes, it does go both ways. So there's a growing recognition and research of bidirectionality in the parent-child relationship, and more specifically, of children's effect on the parent-child relationship. So bidirectionality may include any behavioral, psychological, or biological processes that alter relations between two people, but they're not necessarily self-initiated or intentional. So let me give you some examples of how a bidirectional view of the parent-child relationship might be incorporated into working with parents. If a teen does something seriously wrong, it can be assumed that the parent is a bad parent, so that they're neglectful, providing little or no structure, and the parent-child relationship is somehow lacking. Another view is that the parent is influenced by their teen's behavior, so that they might react in 4 different ways to what a teen is doing. First, they could choose to ignore the behavior, hoping it'll go away, and be in denial, essentially. Second, they might be intimidated by their teen. Third, they might not be aware of their teen's behavior, so they might be ignorant of what's going on. Or fourth, they may feel the behavior is inevitable, and there's little they can do, so really having a feeling of futility. In other words, a parent's reaction may simply be a response to the teen's behavior. The teen's behavior changes the parent's behavior, actions, and decisions. This raises the question as to whether parenting is an action that prompts teen behavior or a reaction to teen behavior. In a study on youth delinquency, Kerr and Staton have found that there were no instances in which a parenting behavior predicted a change in delinquency over time. Parenting behavior in this study seemed to be a reaction to youth delinquency, but did not seem to produce it. And so these results seem to show that delinquency actually prompts parents to be less controlling and less supportive. Think about how you see parents being influenced by their kids. How do you approach parenting, as an action or reaction? How could you incorporate bidirectionality more into your work? Now this quote is from the mother of 2 teens living in a rural area. She's married, she self-describes as white, and she really highlights the bidirectionality in her family. So she says, "The key, I think, is that you stay as teachable for the whole time you're parenting them as they are right now. We can't just decide, okay, I'm going to parent this way and hang with it. If you don't stay flexible, though you need to have boundaries, there has to be places where you're going to choose to die on this issue or this value, but you have got to be willing to flex and learn almost as much information as they're taking in. You've got to be a student of your children." Now this figure from Cummings and Schermerhorn provides a conceptual framework for really thinking about outcomes in youth from a process-oriented perspective that takes into consideration bidirectionality and some of the other things we've been talking about. So at the top of the diagram, you see parent and child characteristics with bidirectional arrows into family factors, suggesting that parent and child characteristics moderate the impact of family on the child. These multiple familial factors, which in this diagram include parenting, attachment, marital relationships, sibling relationships, and family type, are all likely to affect the psychological processes that constitute children's agency, which is the next box. Next, it's suggested that the psychological processes that constitute agency emerge from transactions among child, familial, and extrafamilial factors over time to influence children's developmental status, defined here to include moral development, social interaction, cognitive performance, and efficacy within the family at any given point in time. And you can see the downward arrow on the right-hand side of the diagram that represents development over time. So this is a process. And let me point out here the arrows of causal influence go both ways, emphasizing the importance of bidirectionality. So parent characteristics and child characteristics influence the family factors, which impact young people's agency, and then ultimately their development. So let's talk a bit more specifically about agency. In terms of family, children's exercise of agency reflects their self-initiated efforts to affect interactions and relationships with others in the family. So agency encompasses cognition, behavior, emotions, and social skills that influence youth's patterns of influence in bidirectional relationships with parents, siblings, and other family members. Agency takes place within the context of bidirectionality, but bidirectionality is not necessarily self-initiated or intentional, so agency is a separate function from that. Agency is also related to the developmental stages in that what a teen wants to accomplish is related to their feeling of agency, and their increasing cognitive ability and more abstract thinking allows them to feel like an agent and act like an agent more frequently. So this is increasing as young people grow and develop. So children who are encouraged and supported in being agentic will be more successful teenagers, as they'll be better equipped to be proactive when they're faced with developmental, cognitive, and social challenges. I want to distinguish between being an agent and feeling like an agent. When we talk about being an agent, we're talking about teens' tendency to act or initiate action. When we talk about feeling like an agent, we're talking about teens' sense of agency, so their perceived capacity to produce a particular outcome, their beliefs about their ability to control a particular situation or experience, and so their sense of efficacy. Now, it's ideal when a young person can both be an agent and feel like an agent. And practically, that means a young person has the skills and confidence to disagree with people, share their opinion in a respectful way, that they can be in a relationship and not be submissive. And one thing teens can learn in the family is how to do this. For instance, how do you state your opinion in an appropriate way? So learning to be an agent and being encouraged to exercise agency within the family may serve as a prelude to agency in other social settings. So for instance, research has found that conflicts with siblings that can provide practice and reinforcement for acting like an agent may serve as motivators for the exercise of agency in other settings, like with peers, for example. However, teens can also use agency in a negative way. So research has found that teens may use their abilities to win conflicts rather than compromise. They may not always want a peaceful or fair solution, and they can change parents' emotions. This has been found more so of mothers and less so of fathers, but teens tend to act in certain ways in the family to affect family dynamics. And again, this is not always positive. So a teen might attempt to influence their parents or alter their parents' response to sibling conflict. So children can be initiators as well as recipients in the family system. Now let me give a couple of examples of what this might look like. With teens, parents' rules and expectations are motivated by how important the issue is to the child. So then parents might change their position, not out of inconsistency, but as a result of the child's influence or reasoning. Another example, children who believe they have control over anger between two adults and or control over their own exposure to this inter-adult anger may become more aroused and activated to intervene, whereas young people who do not believe they have control experience a much greater sense of helplessness and threat. They become less engaged in the argument and are much less likely to intervene. So children from homes with high marital conflict, for example, are more likely to intervene in interparental conflict than are children from homes with less conflict. This action reflects their exercise of agency. However, the children in the home with high marital conflict may also experience a decrease in emotional security. So they're likely to have little effect on their parents and the arguments, and this will cause the child to feel less like an agent. So while these young people are attempting to exercise more agency, at the same time, they're less likely to have a sense of agency about their family circumstances. This isn't suggesting that teens in homes with high marital conflict should intervene, but provides an example that in most cases, young people cannot stop or prevent this type of conflict. So a child who does try may become quite discouraged and lose that feeling of agency. Now, agentic behavior happens within the context of bidirectionality, and recognizing that the child is an active participant in the family and not just a recipient of parental behavior is really critical to fully understanding family relationships and family dynamics. So how can you help parents distinguish between the two while encouraging both in their teen? Let me share a quote from a parent of a teen that really hits this point home. She talks about her teen exercising his sense of agency and how hard it can be as a parent to sit back and watch, while also promoting and encouraging this. Parenting adolescents is as much to grow us up as adults as it is our children. I'm being stretched way more than I'd ever imagined that I could ever be stretched and survive it and make rational choices and continue to love and care about someone who oftentimes chooses to go in a different direction than what I think is in their best interest.